Thank you for joining us for our second edition of Remembering Cumberlands. We have with us today a very special guest, Mike Duncan, who is a former chair of the Republican National Committee and of the former chair of the Tennessee Valley Authority, and more importantly today, the class of 1971 from Cumberland College at the time. Mike, thank you for sitting down with us today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back at Cumberland.
Yeah, I know that you're in town for personal reasons. I know the weather wasn't that great, but thank you for agreeing to sit down with us today.
Happy to do it.
In 71, I graduated in 2005, and I would just kind of be interested in knowing your experiences on campus. In 70s, what was campus like? What was the atmosphere?
Well, campus was a lot smaller in 1970. Dr. Taylor's done a great job with his vision of what the campus should look like. So we had fewer buildings, we had fewer people during that period of time, but we had some wonderful professors, a good student body, and it felt like home. I looked at several schools before I decided on Cumberland, and Dr. Taylor was a big part of that. He actually recruited me while he was still a student here at Cumberland. It was just a family.
Could you tell me the story of how Dr. Taylor, then a student working for the admissions office, was able to recruit you to Cumberland?
Well, I was a student in Oneida High School in nearby Scott County, and our guidance counselor had a bias, I believe, for another university in the state of Tennessee.
Oh, really?
And he advised a lot of us that we should be looking there. And one afternoon we had the opportunity to meet with a representative from Cumberland. And I knew about Cumberland because my uncles had attended here, and when I was a child I'd been over here with them, so I had some idea about the school. And Dr. Taylor came in and made a great presentation. He wasn't a doctor then, it was Jim Taylor, and he was finishing his degree at Cumberland and working in recruitment and development at the time, and talked about the small size. And for me, that was the difference. I had an opportunity to go to a major university with a scholarship at that point, but Cumberland offered me something different, and I felt that it fit my needs at the time.
You told me earlier that you had a lot to do with at least the early stages as far as the planning.
Well, I won't say a lot to do, but it's an interesting story. When I was student government president, we had something called the Wigwam, where we had breakfast, and it was kind of the student hangout, and it was woefully inadequate. And I was talking to our
Where
board
was
chairman.
that at on campus?
Actually, it was in the old gym, in the basement of where the old gym is, and you entered behind this building.
Okay, so what we call today the intramural gym. Okay.
Yes, that was the old gym at the time. So we had a facility that was inadequate, and I talked to the board chairman, George Griffin of London, Kentucky, who was head of Laurel Grocery, about the need for a student center. I'd been to a lot of other campuses and had seen other student centers, and he said, well, why don't you bring it up at a board meeting? I wasn't sure that I could, but George encouraged me to do that. Well, when I did that, Dr. Boswell wasn't ready for the idea. He actually asked me to leave the meeting so he could talk to the trustees after I'd made my presentation. But I talked about the need, and I talked about that the students would pay for this themselves. And I proposed that we have a student referendum to pay for the student center. And we did have a student referendum. It passed. Dr. Boswell was convinced. We started construction of the Student Center, and it's still there today, and it's named after J.M. Boswell. So you can thank George Griffin and Dr. Boswell and the students in 1970-71.
So he was caught off guard, but he seemed like he ended up coming around to the decision.
He came around to the decision. Dr. Boswell was very physically conservative, and he was always worried about having enough money. He didn't want to start buildings unless he knew where all the money was, and we provided him a way to show him that really the students need this, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for it. I had great teachers here. I went, as I told you, in the summer, so I graduated in 3 years. I didn't get to experience every professor that I would have liked to have had, but it was just a great place to be from 1968 to 1971.
Do you have any professors that stand out in your mind as far as what they might have taught you in class, or things that they may have taught you outside of class that you might have carried with you through your career?
Well, I think it starts with Dr. Boswell. J.M. Boswell was the president of the college then, and I was very close to Dr. Boswell. I got to spend a lot of time with him as student body president, and he taught me about service. And this was before the idea of servant leadership was bandied about in the country, but he personified that. And he taught us that you needed to look for things bigger than yourself to be involved in, and he was that way. Dr. Boswell dedicated his life to Cumberland, and then he retired, and Dr. Taylor became president. So that's one that stands out. In the classroom, Dr. Chester Young was the head of the History and Political Science Department. I know Dr. Wake is today, and Eric was here during that period of time, was a great teacher. But I had a course called Methods. It was the methodology course, Historical Methods. And in that course, you learn to take things apart and then put them back together, to analyze and then synthesize. And that probably was the best course that I had at Cumberland, and I'm still using in my communications efforts and my persuasion efforts and my business efforts today, some of the things that I learned from that course.
So still today from that course.
Sure.
That's
I
great.
did my senior research paper on George Washington's letters. It taught me how to do historic research, basic research, and it taught me how to analyze a large body of facts and then to put it together in a story and a narrative that makes sense.
And I had read you spoke in 2009 at an alumni dinner, and you had mentioned several classmates by name, Jalen Singleton, Tim Hinderlot, and Nelda Barton Collins. I was just curious after reading that, after all this time, why those students specifically? Did you mention by name?
Well, I did my speech based on the 5 People That You Meet in Heaven, the book that was a popular bestseller, and I tried to tie that together with the 5 people that I'd met at Cumberland that had a significant influence on my life, and those were 3 of the people. Nelda Barton Collins was already in the community. She was a business leader in the community, but was very active for the college at that time and was involved in Republican politics and encouraged me in that. Tim Hinderlot was my roommate. Tim had run track at the University of Tennessee and transferred to Cumberland, and he was up every morning. He got me up early in the morning because he was out running every morning, and we're still friends. His family and my family have been close over the years. And Lynn Singleton provided unique views of the world for us. Lynn was from Ohio with an Eastern Kentucky background, marketing personality. He's an Emmy and Tony Award winner today. He takes off-Broadway plays and produces them around the country. He manages buildings all over the world and was just a dynamic personality here. And each of them taught me different things as a student.
Very successful through the Republican Party. I'd mentioned earlier, you've worked with several presidents all the way to becoming the chair of the Republican National Committee. How do you get that far? From Oneida, how do you get there?
Well, you start young. I started when I was 8 years old. The first campaign that I worked on was for my uncle Clarence Smith, who ran for superintendent of schools in Scott County, Tennessee. And I went door to door with him one summer, and we lost. We lost by 12 votes.
12.
And I learned a lot. I learned at Sunday school the weekend after the election that all my aunts and uncles didn't vote for him because they didn't vote. So I learned that you got to turn people out.
Could have been 12 right there.
We could have had enough potentially to have elected him from that one particular small church. I was very active in student government. I was active in the dorm council. I was president of the student government. My final year I was treasurer. The year before that, I was very active in the college Republicans, and we had one of the largest clubs in the country at that time. We registered over 500 individuals to vote here in Whitley County. This was right after the vote had been given to 18-year-olds by President Nixon. So it was something new on college campuses, and I was involved in that and involved at the state and national level with the college Republican organization.
When you started at that age, you become a delegate. Did you have any goals as far as, did you ever think about political office, or where did you want to end up?
I think a lot of people assumed that I was going to run for office because I'd been student body president, and a lot of my friends thought that that's where I was headed. I enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed getting things done, making a difference, understanding the policy of the time and trying to affect a policy. Probably the older that I've gotten, the less enamored with the idea of me running myself. It's just that I've enjoyed helping others, and starting with President Nixon, I've worked with every Republican president since, and with President Bush 43, I was able to advise him on a regular basis as chairman of the party.
What's that like, being able to go to the White House to advise the president? I think even after I've gone as far as you've gone, I think I would still be a little excited on my way to the White House.
Well,
Does that ever go away?
No, it never. Every time that you walk through the gates there, and Dr. Taylor and Dinah and their son Jim visited me when I worked at the White House for President Bush 41. We spent a day there, and it was just a great day for me. No, it doesn't go away. The first time that you do anything, the first time you ride on Air Force One, the first time that you go into the Oval Office with the President to report, the first time that you have a dinner at the White House, all those things are things that you'll remember forever. But you never get over that thrill because you're representing the greatest country on earth. When you walk through those gates, you've got to think, wow, this is important, and I've got to do my very best. You have great respect. I have great respect for the presidency of the United States. As I mentioned to you earlier, one of my senior papers here, my senior thesis, was on George Washington and the choices that he made that have great effect today. The fact that he turned down a third term, that he turned down being a king for this country, the fact that he established what the parameters of power for the executive in the country were. So the office of the presidency has a great meaning regardless of whether there's a Republican or Democrat there.
Any opinions that you would like to share on the candidates, the Republican candidates?
Well, I think personally any of our candidates would be superior to the Democrat candidate this fall. I know them all. I know Ron Paul, and of course Rand Paul. I worked with him in 2008 when he was running for president then. He believes in freedom. He has more of a libertarian view, certainly a strict constructionist of the Constitution. I know Newt Gingrich. I've worked with Newt not only when he was Speaker, but when I was chairman of the party. He's a brilliant guy. I took a course that he offered at Kennesaw State College by satellite once. So I know he's a good classroom teacher. Really a good idea guy. Rick Santorum is a moral man. I know Rick. I worked with him when he was a senator, and he is very earnest in his beliefs, and I think he understands what's going on with the culture in the country. And then last, Mitt Romney, someone that I know very well. He was a candidate the last time we campaigned together for John McCain last time. So I've traveled with him some. I know he has deep religious beliefs and has a philosophic background, I believe, in tune with the party, and understands the economy, which I believe is going to be the overriding issue in this campaign.
Do you want to make any predictions?
No, I'm not in the prediction business.